The Blind King Who Rode into Battle. Part 1. John of Bohemia. Today, we're going over one of the most insane acts of defiance in the history of warfare. A king who hadn't seen a single thing in over a decade. Not his kingdom, not his son's face, not even his own hand in front of him. Rode directly into the most brutal battle of the 14th century. He wasn't tricked into it. He wasn't dragged there. He asked to go. He begged to go. And when his men told him the battle was already lost and that he should flee to save his life, he said something that historians have been quoting for nearly 700 years. Far be it that the king of Bohemia should run away. Take me to the place where the noise of the battle is the loudest. This is the story of John of Bohemia, the blind king. Who is John? It's 1296, and in the city of Luxembourg, a boy is born to one of the most powerful men in Europe. His father is Henry VII, Holy Roman Emperor, ruler of Luxembourg, a man with more titles than a medieval library. His son, named John, is raised not in the muddy borderlands of Germany, but in the gleaming courts of Paris. French tutors, French food, French everything. John grows up surrounded by the greatest knights and scholars of the age. He is educated in the traditions of chivalry, a code of honor that said a man's worth was measured not in how long he lived, but in how bravely he fought. He takes that lesson very, very seriously. In 1310, at just 14 years old, John's father arranges a marriage for him. His bride is Elizabeth of Bohemia, sister of the recently deceased King of Bohemia. It's a political move, a way to give the Luxembourg dynasty a claim to the Bohemian throne. John and Elizabeth travel to Prague, where he is crowned King of Bohemia. He is 14, king of a country he's never been to, married to a woman he just met, surrounded by nobles who already don't like him because, and they're pretty upfront about this, he's too French. So John does what any reasonable young king would do when his subjects don't respect him. He leaves. He spends the next several decades doing almost everything except ruling Bohemia. He travels constantly. He joins crusades in Lithuania. He fights in tournaments across Europe. He makes alliances, breaks a few, and slowly builds a reputation as one of the most fearless knights on the continent. He loves battle the way some men love music or books. It gives him something his kingdom never could, a feeling of absolute clarity. But John has a problem. A big one, the blindness. In 1336, John the King of Bohemia is on crusade in Lithuania when he contracts ophthalmia, an eye infection that slowly, painfully robs him of his sight. At first, it is manageable. A blur here, a darkness at the edges of his vision there. But by the time he is 39 years old, John of Bohemia is completely, irreversibly blind. He cannot see his servants. He cannot see the faces of his advisors. He cannot see his son. He cannot see his sword. For most men, especially in the 14th century, this would have been the end. You go home. You sit in a chair. You have someone read to you. You wait for the end. But John was not most men. He had spent his entire life chasing the chivalric ideal, the belief that courage and honor were the only things that truly mattered. And now, staring into a permanent darkness, he made a decision. He was not done yet. In 1337, when the 100 Years' War breaks out between England and France, his old ally King Philip VI of France calls in a favor. France needs men, good men, experienced men. John answers the call, blind and all. I may not be able to see the battlefield, he reportedly told his advisors. But I can still hear it, and I can still ride. Philip is so impressed that he doesn't just accept John's help. He makes him the governor of Languedoc, one of the most important regions in southern France. A blind man, running a French province. And apparently he does a decent job. But the real test is coming. And it's going to arrive on a rainy August afternoon in a field near a small village in northern France. The 100 Years' War. Here's what you need to understand about the situation in 1346. The 100 Years' War had been grinding along for almost a decade. Edward III of England had decided, with the kind of confidence that only comes from having an extremely good army, that France was basically his. His claim? His mother was French. French enough, he figured, to make him the rightful king of France. Philip VI disagreed. Loudly. With an army. In July 1346, Edward III landed an invasion force of around 14,000 men on the coast of Normandy. His army proceeded to march through northern France doing what medieval armies did, burning, looting, and generally ruining everyone's day. Edward's strategy was to provoke Philip into attacking him somewhere of Edward's own choosing, a place where his smaller, better disciplined army could use the terrain to its advantage. Philip, furious and honor-bound, took the bait that he assembled a massive force. Estimates put it between 20,000 and 40,000 men, including thousands of mercenary Genoese crossbowmen, the finest ranged fighters money could buy. Among Philip's allies riding to meet the English was the blind King John of Bohemia, commanding the advance guard with his 500 loyal Bohemian knights. His son, Charles, was there too, also fighting for France, also eager to prove himself. On the night before the battle, the two of them made camp at a field near a village called Crécy. John couldn't see the field, but he could feel the tension in the air. The Battle of Crécy, August 26, 1346. Late afternoon. Edward III had positioned his army on a hillside in a brilliantly chosen defensive formation. His infantry and dismounted knights formed the center. On both flanks, arranged in wedges pointing forward like the teeth of a plow, his longbowmen. 7,000 of them. Now, here's where things get interesting, because the longbow versus the crossbow is basically the sports car versus the horse-drawn carriage of medieval weaponry, and Philip was about to find this out the hard way. A trained English longbowman could fire an arrow every 5 seconds. That's 12 arrows a minute. That is a lot of arrows. A Genoese crossbowman, while accurate and powerful, needed to use a mechanical crank to reload. His maximum rate? 2 shots a minute. On a good day. Before the battle, there was a rainstorm. The English archers, experienced and prepared, tucked their bowstrings under their helmets to keep them dry. The Genoese crossbowmen did not have this option. Their strings soaked through. The sun came back out just as the battle began, and it shone directly into the faces of the French and their allies charging uphill. Everything, the terrain, the weather, the tactics, was against them before a single arrow flew. Philip sent the Genoese forward first, 6,000 of them, shouting and beating their chests to try and intimidate the English. The English archers stepped forward 1 pace, drew their strings to their ears, and let loose. One witness described it as looking like snow. So thick were the arrows filling the air. The Genoese crossbowmen, outranged, outnumbered in firepower, and shooting into the sun with wet strings, collapsed almost instantly and turned to run. Now, here's where Philip made a catastrophic mistake. When he saw his expensive Genoese mercenaries fleeing, he didn't order a retreat. He didn't try to regroup. He screamed at his knights to ride through them. Kill me those scoundrels, for they stop up our road without any reason. And so the French heavy cavalry, thousands of armored knights on war horses, trampled their own crossbowmen, turned into a chaotic stampede, and charged uphill into 7,000 waiting longbowmen. The French cavalry charged 15 times. 15. Every single time they were torn apart by the arrow storm. Horses screaming and falling. Knights pinned under their own dying mounts. The field became a slaughterhouse. And in the middle of all of this chaos and carnage, word reached the blind King John. The battle is going badly. Badly is an understatement. It is a catastrophe. The French are being massacred. Every charge has failed. His aides rush to his side. My lord, the battle is lost. We must flee. Now. John sits still on his horse. Where is my son Charles? We do not know, my lord. We believe he is fighting. John nods slowly, and then he says the words that would echo for 7 centuries. Far be it that the King of Bohemia should run away. Take me to the place where the noise of the battle is the loudest. The Lord will be with us. Fear nothing. Just take good care of my son. His men, his loyal knights, his companions, his brothers in arms. Look at each other. They know what this means. They know that riding into the English line right now is not bravery. It is death. Swift, certain, complete death. And yet not one of them refuses, because that is the code. And John has lived by it his whole life, and they will die by it with him. They do something extraordinary then. Something so strange and so human that historians have been struggling to describe it properly ever since. They tie the reins of their horses together. John's horse in the center. Their horses on either side. A chain of men and beasts, bound together, so that the blind king they are escorting into death will not lose his way. And they ride. The charge. Into the noise. Into the screaming. Into the arrows and the mud and the dying men. John cannot see any of it, but he can hear everything. The roar of the English line, the clash of steel, the thunder of hooves, the screaming of horses. His sword is in his hand. His knights guide him forward, into the heart of the battle. He swings his sword. He connects. Once, twice, maybe more. The chronicler Jean Froissart, who wrote down the most detailed account of this battle, says this: "He came so close to the enemy that he was able to use his sword several times and fought most bravely, as did the knights with him. They advanced so far forward that they all remained on the field. Not one escaped alive. Not one escaped alive. They found John the next morning, the blind king still on the field. His knights surrounding him, their horses still tied together by their bridles. All of them dead. A perfect circle of loyalty, frozen in the mud of Crécy. His son Charles had survived. He had seen the battle turning and, in a decision history would not be particularly kind about, he left." The chronicler Froissart notes drily, "He came in good order to the battle, but when he saw things were going badly for his side, he turned and left. I do not know which way he went. John did not leave. He was 50 years old, blind. In a battle he had no obligation to fight, for a country that wasn't his, in a war that was already lost by the time he charged. He chose death over dishonor. And the man who found his body the next morning was not a French knight, not one of his companions. It was the 16-year-old English Prince Edward, a boy who would one day be known as the Black Prince, one of the greatest warriors England ever produced. Edward walked across the carnage of Crécy and stood over the body of the blind king, still surrounded by his dead companions, their horses still bound together. He was so moved by what he saw, by the sheer defiant madness of what this man had done, that he took John's helmet, the ostrich feathers attached to it, and the dead king's motto, Ich Dien, I serve, those feathers, that motto, they became Edward's own badge. And from that day to this one, more than 670 years later, every Prince of Wales has carried them. The next time you see the symbol of the Prince of Wales, 3 white feathers, the words Ich Dien, you are looking at the legacy of a blind king who refused to run. Legacy John of Bohemia died the way he lived. Not quietly, not safely, but loudly and fully, in the exact middle of the thing he loved most. He gave his kingdom to a son who would become Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV, one of the greatest rulers of the medieval age. His bloodline shaped European history for centuries. But none of that is why we remember him. We remember him because when every rational instinct said run, when his men begged him to flee, when the battle was already decided and his death would change nothing, he chose to ride toward the loudest part of the noise, blind, sword in hand, reins tied to the men who loved him enough to die beside him. Far be it that the King of Bohemia should run away. Part 2. Ching Shih, the woman who commanded 80,000 pirates at its peak. The largest navy in the world did not belong to Britain. It did not belong to France, Spain, or the Ottoman Empire. It belonged to a woman from Canton who had started her career working on a floating brothel. Her fleet had 1,800 ships and 80,000 sailors. She defeated every navy that tried to stop her. And when she finally retired on her own terms, she walked away rich, powerful, and completely unpunished. Her name was Ching Shih, and this is the most incredible career change in history. It's the late 1700s, and in the Pearl River Delta of southern China, a young woman named Ching Shih, whose real name we don't actually know, since the name just means Cheng's widow, is working on a floating brothel. These were common in Canton at the time. Entire communities lived on the water, fishermen, merchants, sailors, criminals. And in this floating world, Ching Shih had learned something important. She was extraordinarily good at reading people. Who had money, who didn't, who could be trusted, who would betray you for the right price. She understood power and leverage in ways that most military commanders would spend their entire careers trying to learn. In 1801, she catches the attention of a man named Chang Ai, one of the most feared pirates in the South China Sea. He commands a confederation of pirate fleets that is already terrifying the region. He wants to marry her. She agrees. On one condition: she gets equal share of everything. Equal power, equal cut, equal say. Chang Ai, apparently very in love and possibly underestimating his future wife, agrees. It is the last underestimation anyone makes about Ching Shih. The rise. Together, Chang Ai and Ching Shih do something no pirate leader in Chinese history had ever done. They unite the rival pirate fleets of the South China Sea into a single confederation, organized under a banner called the Red Flag Fleet. 6 separate fleets, thousands of ships, tens of thousands of men, all working together under a single command structure with rules, codes of conduct, and a share of the profits distributed fairly. Ching Shih co-designs all of it. Then in 1807, Chang Ai dies suddenly, possibly in a typhoon, possibly in a battle. The historical records are a little murky on this one. And now, all of that power has no one to hold it. The traditional expectation in 1807 China would be for the widow to step aside, to let the senior men take over. Ching Shih steps forward instead. She moves fast. Before anyone can challenge her, she consolidates her position by forming an alliance with her late husband's most trusted lieutenant, a young man named Chang Pao. She makes him the operational commander of the Red Flag Fleet, and she becomes its supreme ruler. She was maybe 30 years old. The empire she ran the South China Sea like a CEO runs a corporation, except the performance reviews involved considerably more executions. She created a strict legal code for the entire fleet. Her rules were simple and brutally enforced. If you robbed villagers who were under the fleet's protection, death. If you deserted your post, first offense, your ears were cut off in front of the fleet. Second offense, death. If you gave an order that your commanders hadn't authorized, death. If you took a female captive and mistreated her, death. She ran the taxation of coastal villages like a government. Merchants paid for the right to operate. Villages paid tribute. In return, Ching Shih guaranteed their safety from other pirates. She was, essentially, running an alternate economy across hundreds of miles of coastline. The Chinese government tried to stop her. They sent the Imperial Navy. She destroyed it. The Portuguese tried to help. They sent their warships. She destroyed those too. The British East India Company got involved. She sent them home embarrassed. By 1809, Ching Shih commanded 1,800 ships and somewhere between 60,000 and 80,000 sailors. For comparison, the British Royal Navy at this same period had around 900 ships. She had built the largest pirate empire in history, possibly the largest naval force on Earth at that moment. The exit empires fall. Always. And she knew that hers, built on intimidation, violence, and the personalities holding it together, would eventually fracture. The question was not if, but when, and more importantly, how to get out before it did. In 1810, the Chinese government, having failed to defeat her militarily, tried something different. They sent a negotiator with an offer, full pardon, for her entire fleet. for all crimes. She and her sailors could walk away free. The deal came with conditions. Her fleet would need to surrender its ships. Many of her men would be absorbed into the imperial military. A lesser leader would have seen this as surrender, a humiliation. Ching Shih saw it as the best deal she was ever going to get. She walked into the negotiations herself, no intermediaries, and renegotiated every term. She kept a significant portion of her fleet. Her men who joined the military did so as officers, not grunts. She kept all the wealth she had accumulated. Chong Pao was given a military command, and she personally walked away completely free, rich, untouchable. She retired to Canton, where she opened a gambling house that became very successful. Because of course she did. She died in 1844, at around 69 years old, in her bed, surrounded by her family. In the entire history of piracy, Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts, Henry Morgan, all the great names, almost every pirate story ends the same way. Captured, hanged, shot, drowned. Ching Shih is the exception. She built the biggest pirate empire in history, defeated every navy sent against her, and then decided she was done, on her own schedule, on her own terms, and simply walked away. The woman who started on a floating brothel in Canton ended up as a wealthy businesswoman who had outlasted empires and outmaneuvered governments. If that's not the greatest career arc in history, I don't know what is. So what do John of Bohemia and Ching Shih have in common? Not much on the surface. One was a blind medieval king who charged into a battle he knew he would lose. The other was a pirate empress who conquered an ocean and then retired gracefully. But both of them faced a moment where the world told them what they were supposed to do. Retreat. Step back. Accept your limits. And both of them looked at the world and said very politely and then very violently, no.